Hi. This is fun. So I'm here to talk about political entrepreneurship. I'm on the board of a movement called My Vote, where we're using blockchain to create direct democracy. So that's the thing I want to talk about. There are loads of other really interesting movements, and I want to talk about them too. But I've only got 15 minutes, so I'm going to try and tailor something for the historians in the room who love learning from the past, for the futurists who love thinking about the future, to those who just want to know what we should do right now or what's going on right now. I have no silver bullets, of course, but maybe some stuff that you can take or leave at various points can all be useful. I want to start with a quote though, by Buckminster Fuller. By 2000, politics will simply fade away. There will be no political parties. I don't think he's wrong. I think his timing was optimistic, but I don't think he's wrong. I think something to that tune will probably happen. I think, but we're 17 years late already, which is a bit of a shame. Last year, I decided that I was on holiday. It was Brexit time. I was feeling really annoyed, and so I started blogging. And before I knew it, I'd found all sorts of interesting movements around the world that were doing the stuff that in my head I thought could happen one day. They were doing it, and I thought, this is amazing. So I asked them on Twitter if I could speak to them on Skype. And then I wrote a book about them called Democracy Squared. And I just love that I asked them on Twitter and spoke to them on Skype. And that's how this happened. I think it's telling in of itself, and then I self-published it. So it was all done myself, and I think that sense of agency is something that really inspires me. And I want to bring some of that optimism in the room, because I think it's useful to be optimistic. Have you heard of the word opti-realist? It's someone who's optimistic, they have the positive psychology to move forward, but they're grounded in like the facts. I like to put myself in that fact. So I'm going to talk a bit about this, but I want to talk mainly about these 5 people. These are 5, what we're calling today political entrepreneurs, people who have gone from bitching on Twitter into building something real and putting it into the market or to citizens. And I think are doing quite radical things and proving that the stuff's changing and that we can all have an effect. And that's how I'd love us all to feel in 15 minutes time. 14 minutes time. First, a brief look at the past for those of you who like to do that. I want to start this by saying that we have 3 times more countries than we did in the 50s, which is like something we often forget. So the world is like decentralized compared to 70 years ago by default. And that's kind of mad. I think most people, I certainly didn't really realize that until I looked into it. The second thing is that democracy comes in waves. So until like not that long ago, there were way more autocracies in the world than there were democracies. There were just not that many democracies. And then it shifts a little bit. We start to see them come together. Democracy goes in waves, meaning that you have a positive wave and then a reverse wave quite often. I want to argue that right now we're in a mini reverse wave, but it's all about to get a whole lot better. And then this happens. Yeah, it's awesome. So in the 90s, someone mentioned 89 earlier, this happens. Suddenly, for the first time ever, there's more democracies in the world than there are autocracies. And that's awesome, because that was 30, 40 years ago, something like that. It's really not that long, but we think of democracy as this old Greek thing. But like, it's really new. I think we've been in beta phase all this time. So I don't think we've lived in a democracy yet. I think we've just been playing with the idea of it. But now for the first time we've got technology to do it, because with pen and paper, the only way to participate is through hierarchy. And so now I think it's actually the first time ever that it's possible to really play with like scaling the idea of democracy. I think that's really, really cool. The other thing that's interesting is that those 2 graphs match pretty perfectly, number of autocracies and magnitude of war. And I think if ever someone says democracy is broken, maybe like just point towards one of the benefits. I think it's quite a big benefit, because they match perfectly, or inversely, if we look at those 2 graphs. So I think no matter what you care about most in the world, it depends on democracy for it to really happen. And that's why I care about democracy a lot. Whether we'll call it democracy when we actually get it, I don't know. But I think it's important to like really understand that. So why has it spread so much? Well, I think this conversation between two clever men is quite interesting. Ray Kurzweil, who's a famous futurist, and Mikhail Gorbachev have lunch, and Ray says to Mikhail, in the 80s I wrote a book, and I reckoned that the Soviet Union would become a democracy because of fax and email and cell phones. And Mikhail says, it was a big factor, to be sure. And I love that he predicted pretty much the year that would happen based on maturation of those technologies. It's too simplistic to say that's why that happened, but like, it's interesting. They correlate nicely. Computers, very similar curve. That's household adoption. Or cell phones, like they dip at the same points. Again, I'm not saying that's how it happened, but like it played a part, as Mikhail says over lunch. So I think this is fascinating. In every wave of democracy, I would argue there's a technology that helps. Landlines, fax machines, emails, cell phones, internet. And next is the stuff that's happening now. I think blockchain is the single thing that will help the most to distribute power, to disempower centralized systems, to verify the truth. I think that would be nice to verify the truth a little bit more. I think it could up the standards even of our social networks to verify the truth. So I think like the reason it hurts right now is because we've got a little reverse wave. But that's because the good's about to come as it has the 3 previous or 4 previous waves. So I think this is really, really exciting. Now I think the reason that it feels broken sometimes is just because the version of democracy we have now can no longer cope with what's going on. So if you have more people with more devices that are connected to more devices that think autonomously and that are accessed more often, and you multiply those things, you have what's scientifically known as chaos. And when you have chaos, a centralized system where you vote every 4 years on a very indirect decision is very difficult to it can't really cope with that. I think this puts it quite well. You have on the one hand a really complex world, and on the other hand like this tiny pipe trying to process all that data. And I think that's like any IT person would say that a centralized system is kind of like redundant, or rather doesn't have redundancy. And so the way I put it is that the pipes are too small and we're like lacking bandwidth, basically. I think that's why the political system feels so slow. But there are, the way typically these things change is that someone from the outside who believes that the old thing needs to be destroyed in the favor of something new comes along. And we often don't see them until the noise is big enough. And what I really wanted to do in my research is to find the people who are doing that, because I figured they're probably not on the BBC, but they probably are doing something real. And they really are, and I think this is where I'd kind of like to take this conversation. So I'll just bring them up here. So these 5 projects are projects that I found inspiring for different reasons. What they have in common is that they all use technology to create what I think is a deeper form of democracy. So what I want to argue is that technology will spread democracy faster, like its adoption rate, but it will also deepen it from now on. The other thing they have in common is that none of them come from a government. They all came from outside of a system with something new. And so there's a story about change and the impact that we can all have as individuals, I think. The first person is a guy called Finna Magnusson. He's at Gommet on Twitter. I recommend you follow all these people if you can, because they're wonderfully inspiring. And they crowdsourced a constitution for Iceland. I know it's only 100,000 people, but it's still pretty cool. 300 or so. It's small. It's not the US. And so what they did is every Friday for 6 months, they published a draft version of the Constitution online and asked people for feedback, and then tweaked it the following week. And this just went on and on and on until they had something that 70% of the country voted as the right thing. And then some political gaming decided that the referendum was null, which I think tells us another old news story. But it's amazing that that can even be done. And that wasn't even using amazing technology that had some language processing, but that's about it. You could perfectly imagine a wiki constitution as an ever-evolving thing. So I'm quite inspired by that because it's the base layer of many republics. Another one that's really interesting is Caspar Corpus. You'll find any pictures of him on the internet. I'm not quite sure how old Caspar is, but he's pretty young, and straight out of university he started working in what's known as Estonia's e-residency program that he now runs, and of which I'm a digital citizen. So I'm a digital citizen of Estonia, despite the fact that I've never been there. I'm English and French, and yet online I'm also a citizen of Estonia, and I have some rights there. So that points to something, and they have tens of thousands of citizens now that have real rights in Estonia. So I think that's pretty amazing. They run like a startup. They've changed laws in just a few months based on citizen feedback on their platform, so which is the speed at which a government doesn't really work, and yet they've managed. And that's kind of awesome. This guy is like crazy smart. Follow him on Twitter, Colin McGill. He's like I don't know how to explain how his brain works. But one thing he managed to do that's awesome with his platform Polis is in Taiwan they use AI to understand where people agree and disagree. So we're having a conversation about Uber. Is Uber good or bad? You comment and then you up or down. And once thousands of people do this, the AI knows where you're agreeing and disagreeing. And where they agree is 92% of people thought it wasn't safe enough. And so they changed the laws to make it safer. And the machine could create some coherence in the conversation to know that. I think that's really cool. This guy, Santi Siri, is this like Argentine philosopher meets techie. And he's trying to create what's called liquid democracy, with democracy F. So they started off as like a Trojan horse strategy. They had a party in Argentina, and once one person got elected, what they did is they put all decisions back to the people, and that person would just enact whatever people said, which I think is like a fascinating approach to change as well. So he's trying something called liquid democracy at the moment. They just had an ICO. They're really fascinating, so I recommend looking into them. And another one's where I spend a lot of my time thinking at the moment, which is My Vote. So this guy is called Adam Jacobi. He's an incredibly inspiring man. And what he's done is built a platform called My Vote, where on every issue, we go to the people and ask them what their will is, and then enact that. That's how he describes how we do this. We ask what their will is, and we enact that. The way we do it is through using blockchain, first of all, to verify and distribute that. But I want to just walk you through the process very quickly because it's so simple and yet it's more robust than most things I've seen. One is that there's an issue that you get to vote on. So at the moment there's one on political donations and how those should happen. Then once you click vote now, you have to read some key facts. So there's some independent researchers that come together from various academic institutions and put together some key facts. It goes through some ethics committees, etc., to make sure the language isn't biased. And so that those key facts are populated. If you decide to read them, then you are allowed to vote, which is quite an important thing. An informed constituency is pretty essential. And so then you're given 4 options, what we call destinations. So a really good example would be for immigration. You might give a humanitarian approach to immigration, or do we want to take an economic one, or a border security one? So these aren't party affiliated. These are 4 different destinations that could be interesting. And on all of them, once you've read through, you're allowed to yes or no. And every month we're running this, and at the moment we're talking to the UN. In the States, we think in 2020 someone might run as a My Vote candidate. In Australia for their next prime ministerial elections. So this is like real stuff that's happening, that have products to show it, that have all been like beta tested in some way. And so if you weren't optimistic about the future of democracy before right now, I hope you are a little bit more, because I find this stuff like incredibly exciting. I believe in this so much so that my job is to help companies be run by their people. And soon my stepson is going to go into a school where the kids run the school. He's 7. And I would really love in his lifetime to see countries run by citizens. And I think we now have the technology to make that possible. And what we can all do, if we can't create our own movements, we can support the ones that exist. We can request more participation. I think it's citizenship is the right word. It becomes all of our role to not talk about the system, but to talk about my role in the system and what I can do to make this happen. So buy my book, it's on the internet. Democracy Squared, it's on Amazon. Follow the different Twitter profiles I gave you. Look on their websites for what they need. They're normally quite explicit about what they need. Try and help them, and if you don't like them, find other ones that are doing great stuff, because they're multiplying by the hundreds. And I think, like everything else the internet does, once the genie is out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. So I'm pretty optimistic that this is where it's going. Thanks.